Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Diane Nutting. Can I just get a thumbs up from somebody that you can hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you so much. Um, just before we get started, I do want to just sort of talk about accessibility for this thing. We do have automatic captions enabled for this session. So if you do need those, please feel free to navigate down to the bottom of your Zoom browser. There should be a CC there. And if you click on that and then click Show Captions, you can actually show the captions as they happen. If you have any issues with that, just drop something in the chat and I'm sure Sloan or Lily or someone will be able to help you. You can actually hover your mouse over there and it'll turn into a hand and you can move those captions wherever you would like on the screen. If you have any other access needs, please let us know. I can't see the chat when I'm presenting, but please drop it in the chat or send a direct message to Lily or Sloan, and I'm sure they will absolutely assist in whatever way they can. I'm going to ask that folks leave their mics off when they're not speaking. And then, of course, if you have something to say, please put your mic on. I'm going to encourage us, if you are comfortable doing so, to feel free to leave your camera on, just so we can kind of have a community feeling here. That said, if you have a need or an access need where that is not something that is comfortable for you, please feel free to have your camera off. But hopefully we can have some cameras on when we have our discussion at the very end. So again, my name is Diane Nutting. I am an accessibility consultant and practitioner based in Washington, D.C. And seasonally, I work with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival as the accessibility coordinator. I've been with them since fall of 2016. I am, just a quick visual description, I am a middle-aged woman with chin length, brownish, blondish, slightly grayish hair, and I'm wearing a lavender sweater today, and I'm coming to you from my apartment in North Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of DC. I'm going to toss it over to Jamie Katz-Court to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Lily and Sloan and Uplift for putting this together. I am Jamie Katz-Court. I work for the North Carolina Arts Council. I am the music and dance director here and also the accessibility coordinator. So it's a pleasure to be with you all and looking forward to today's presentation and happy to pass it along to my colleague, S.A. Corin.
Hey everybody, I'm S.A. I'm leaning in from Raleigh, where I work for the City of Raleigh as their Arts Grant Director in the Raleigh Arts Office. I am a mixed race, middle-aged woman wearing blue glasses, goldish earrings, and I have brown hair. Thank you so much for the invitation. I can't wait to hear what I know I get to talk, but I actually am really interested to hear what you all have to say. So I look forward to this. Back to you, Diane.
Thanks so much, SA. So the session today is going to kind of be in 4 sections. I'm going to talk a little briefly about accessibility at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival and really focusing on kind of not so much the how, but the what we do, what we believe, and a little bit of the how that manifests itself. And then we're going to move on to Jamie and SA, who are going to offer some more insight into accessibility, and then talk more about some tips and a lot of resources. We have a lot of resources for you today. And Sloan is going to be dropping some links in the chat as we get going, but we'll also provide a list of those resources after this session to anyone who's attended. So I'm sharing the folk life journey today, and I say that word journey, and if you know me at all, you know that I use that word all the time. This work is a journey. It's consistently fluid. It's always ever changing due to technology and the way our society thinks about accessibility and the way that things are developing over time and what we learn from the implementation of our events. So our goal today is to really just kind of sort of offer a smorgasbord of options for you. And we're hoping that you come away with something that sparks in you and you're like, yeah, I can apply that to the structures of my festival. We know that every festival is different, small, big, long, short, all of it. So that's our goal today. And the last thing I will just say is that this is a safe space, particularly when we get to the discussion section. And Lily, I know that you tend to take that section out. But this is a safe space. So please feel free to ask questions when we get to that part of the session, and don't feel like you need to censor yourself. Don't worry about your language. Just, we want to make sure that you're able to get your question out. So just quickly, some disability fast facts here. Just making sure that we're all on the same page. When we think about disability, we often think about the things that we can physically see. Someone's using a wheelchair or a mobility device. Someone is blind or low vision. Someone may be deaf or hard of hearing and using a sign language interpreter. But there's a wide umbrella of disability that includes physical sensory conditions, less visible conditions, things like neurodivergence, ADHD, anxiety, PTSD. There's also several major health conditions that we think about when we are thinking about creating accessibility and inclusivity in a space. So chronic illnesses, things like diabetes, Ehlers-Danlos, long COVID, mental health conditions, autoimmune, all of these things are things that kind of factor in when we're thinking about creating an accessible environment. Now, the CDC estimates that at least 1 in 4 persons has a disability. And I would say probably 85% of those are not disabilities that are visible, right? So that means that statistically, we know that the communities that are coming to our festivals, we know that we have disabled folks within our communities, within our gathering communities. We know we have it within our staff, within our volunteer corps. So we just think about that as we sort of frame this work. And the interesting thing is, depending on how your festival is constructed, for instance, at the Folklife Festival, it's a porous perimeter. There are no tickets. There is no registration. It's a public event. So we may not know who is using any of our services at any given time. So that's also something to kind of think about. So when we think about the Folklife Festival and our vision for accessibility, we think about a couple things. The first is, we want to strive for inclusive versus adaptive design. And what I mean by that is that we are always thinking about, how do we think about accessibility from the very beginning as we're sort of creating the experience, rather than creating the whole experience and then going, oh no, and trying to kind of stick things on at the end. So we're always kind of thinking, trying to think as much as we can inclusively from the very beginning. And these are my 4 big verbs that all my colleagues, if any of them are on this call, are probably either chuckling or rolling their eyes, because I use these verbs all the time. And we always are striving to assume that visitors, there's a variety of ways to move, communicate, engage, and process. And when we think about those 4 verbs as we create experiences, it helps us realize that not everyone may be accessing the experience the way we are. The next thing that I will say is that, and I will just say, along with those 4 verbs, we don't really have the time to do this now, but if you think through an event that you've gone to, a cultural arts event or a festival or event, and you think through your experience all the way from kind of finding out about the event and knowing that you wanted to go, purchasing a ticket, going to the event, experiencing it, getting something to eat, all of those things, all the way to going home. And then if you go back through and think about, okay, how would individuals who may move in a variety of ways access that? How may people who communicate in a variety of ways access that, who process information differently? So just by doing that, that can help you sort of get a baseline of, what do we need to look at? What do we need to think about? I always talk about extending intentional invitation. And what I mean by that is just making sure that we are letting folks know that they are welcome. I never want someone with a disability to have to jump through a bunch of hoops or try to figure out if we have considered that they may come and be a part of our community gathering. So a lot of that is in the messaging and communication, which Jamie is going to talk a lot about. Our signage on site, just how we kind of think about just really making sure that people are aware and people feel included and welcome, and really creating an equitable engagement experience, which we'll talk about a little bit. So when we think about accessibility, there's several areas that we think about on the festival site. And the first is space and structures. And within that, is everything from what is our physical footprint of the festival, what's the terrain like. If you've been on the National Mall, you might know where our festival takes place. You might know that the terrain actually differs from one end of the mall to the other, depending on how old the trees are and how the grass has been laid and what's going on with the gravel. So, we think about those types of things. We also think about if there's any, how is the festival intersecting with the environment as it is? So for instance, if your festival is happening on a street, are you blocking pathways that are normal, ways of access for individuals who might travel that way? So just how are you intersecting with the actual environment of the space when you drop your kind of mini city and mini festival in there? Thinking about paths of travel to get to the festival, thinking about pick up and drop off areas that you can create. What's the parking situation? And then thinking about temporary and built existing structures. So like if you are using structures that already exist, maybe like a performing arts space, a library, just thinking about what the accessibility is already in those spaces, but also if you're building structures or building tents or setting up areas, how are you thinking about the approach, the entrances? What's the internal navigation in those spaces once you get into that activity area? How are you making sure that you're free from obstacles, either signs or things that you're putting up, or gee, there's a giant tree there and we obviously can't move the giant tree. So how are we going to make sure that we're creating an accessible path of travel, around that tree as we're creating our space? The seating is a big thing, making sure there are places to sit and rest during the festival. Making sure if you have a performance space that there's viewing areas, if you're having an interpreter, making sure that things are cane detectable for someone who might be using a white cane. And I know Essay is going to talk a little bit about where you can find resources that tell you some information about that and how blind and low vision folks might navigate space. Thinking about restrooms, concession, rest areas, how do you shelter from the weather? I know Sarah talked a little bit about that in her session a few weeks ago. And what mobility, support can you provide? At the end of this session, we're going to put up a resource from the ADA Center, which has a guide for temporary event accessibility, and it has all those little things you need to do of like, well, how many parking spaces should we have? And, how wide should the entrance to the tent be? So we're going to share that resource at the end. The next thing we think about in accessibility is the engagement experience. So if we have tents or booths or activities, what's the intended guest experience? We ask folks to consider the layout, the communication that happens in that space, and the interaction that might happen in that space. This includes concessions and retail spaces. And just how are we going to create an equitable experience? Do we need a support like, for instance, a sensory guide to help folks know high and low sensory areas? Do we need things like allergen menus to make sure that folks can feel included in that way? Do we need to provide a special program, or can we provide a special program that just is a choice for folks? We're not trying to necessarily filter folks into that, but that they have that opportunity to experience the festival in a way. When it comes to communication access, we're thinking about any oral or visual communication that might need a support. So for example, can we provide audio description, alternate format materials in Braille or large print? For those who might need access to spoken language, can we provide assistive listening in any of our performance spaces? Can we provide ASL interpretation for certain events? Can we provide real-time captioning for those events? And then messaging and outreach, which is really key. And Jamie is going to take this on. So I'm going to leave most of this for her, but I will just say that telling your story is super important. And also thinking about having a centralized space at the festival that is a place where folks can come and actually get information about accessibility and get support while they're at the festival. I always like to think about representation within the content, so I always try to support as much as I can with our curators and programmers. If we're exploring a certain theme and I happen to know a disabled artist who is part of that, just making sure that, again, that 1 in 4 is represented in the content. But also within our staffing and within our, just thinking about where is that representation. It goes the other way too. We try to think about accessibility providers that are have a knowledge and lived experience with the content. So for example, the Folklife Festival just celebrated Indigenous Voices of the Americas last summer, and we really worked to identify ASL interpreters who identified as Indigenous. We worked to identify an audio describer who was Indigenous so that they could come and really sort of enhance. And that is part of our journey. That is not something we have done in the past aggressively, but it's something we really worked towards this year. So again, that was a next level thing for us because we were ready to do that. And then last thing, of course, is protocols, procedures, health and safety, thinking about bathrooms. Hopefully, we're not going to get back to a situation where folks are required or mandated to mask all the time. However, recognizing that a lot of folks with disabilities are medically fragile and they might be masking. And so how are you, communicating that it is a mask-friendly space? How can you make sure that, you have restrooms available, that you're letting folks know about, areas to rest, nursing areas. If there's a building near you that has an all-gender bathroom or an adult changing table, like including that information can be really, really useful to someone making the trip out to your festival. And of course, emergency planning. I know Sarah talked a lot about this in her session a couple weeks ago, but just making sure that as you plan for emergencies, that you are planning for folks who have disabilities to also be part of that protocol as well. So again, as you create your emergency action plan, both for short term, like we need to cancel this performance, but also should something more, larger impact occur, how are you communicating to folks who might communicate, move, process, engage in different ways? Okay, and this is just a quick visual of some of the ways that actualizes itself. So on the top left here, we have a blue sign with white writing and iconography that indicates the accessibility services on site. This is right outside of our accessibility tent. In the top middle here, you'll see a grassy area, and actually there's a cable under a yellow and black long sort of plastic covering, and then over that covering is what's called an accessible cable ramp. So that's a rubberized area that allows for a wheelchair or a mobility device to easily access across that cable ramp without getting stuck. In the bottom left is an example of one of our venue schedule boards. And you can see on the left, we've added icons to indicate which sessions are ASL interpreted, for example, so that someone walking by could just say, oh, that session in 15 minutes is going to be interpreted. In the bottom middle here, you can see a concessions area that's set up on a sidewalk. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the countertops are at different levels. So again, allowing multiple levels of access. On the bottom left, bottom right, you see an audio description tour happening. That's the woman standing is a trained audio describer, and she's working with 2 low vision guests who are exploring a Alfombra sawdust flower carpet, and she's describing in detail so that they can encounter that carpet the way a guest would. And then on the top right is an excuse to use one of my favorite pictures of all time from the festival, which is from 2017. We did a circus theme, and this is one of our participants, Karen, who is demonstrating plate spinning. And she is decorated in a very simple sort of clown makeup, and she's holding a yellow plate and a wooden stick. And there is a young man, absolutely agog, about 5 or 6, who is reaching for the plate, and his parents are smiling on. This was part of a sensory-friendly morning that we did before the festival opened. We did sort of a quieter morning so that folks could experience the festival, folks who are neurodivergent. So great. How do we do it? Because I only have like 2 minutes before I pass over to Jamie here. So it really starts with conversations. So we have a lot of conversations with our colleagues. We talk about the design of space. I try to learn as much as possible as the accessibility coordinator. The question that I always start with is, tell me what the intended guest experience is in this part of the festival. Is it a performance? Tell me about the performance. Is it highly visual? Is it highly interactive? Tell me what is supposed to happen in this space. What do you envision happens in this space? And then I look at that and I go back to that list of, move, process, communicate, engage. And I think, okay, what do we need to think about and what supports do we need to put in place to create a level of equal engagement? Is it adding an ASL interpreter? Is it creating 2 levels of this activity table? For instance, just a simple thing, a interactive art project where folks are, adding ribbons, for instance, tying ribbons onto a grid, like a metal grid. Making sure that we have ribbons that are at 2 levels. We have areas that you can tie on at low levels and high levels. Just something that simple to make sure that we are thinking about everyone in that process. We also, in our process, we think beyond our guests. We think about accessibility for our staff, our volunteers, for our participants. I will say in the past couple of years, we have intentionally really made an effort to make sure that our participants know that not only are we an accessible and inclusive space, and we will support them when they come on site to make sure their activity or their performance is accessible, but also what do they need to be successful and comfortable and included in our space. So we think a lot about that. We increase awareness and knowledge and empowerment throughout the entire process. And we recognize that there's a fluidity and we maintain flexibility. I come from a theater background, which means that I was trained that, the show opens and that's it and nothing ever changes. And that is not how it works in the festival environment. So, we can have up to a 10-day festival. And I have learned very quickly, well, no, I have not learned quickly. I have learned over years that day 1 does not look like day 10. And that doesn't mean we have failed. It means we are learning as the process goes on. And you all have experienced this, right? You put up signs, you put up stanchions, the flow of traffic is going to go this way. And within 20 minutes of your event, you're like, oh, or you're going to do it a completely different way and we have to fix it for the next day. In the fall of 2018, I think it was, we did a special festival in conjunction with the opening of the Asian American Museum. And it was at night. It started at 5 o'clock at night and it went all night and then went into the next day. And there was a big pathway next to a building and sort of a dark corridor with all sorts of activity tables with tradition bearers doing interactive activities. And we'd been up for about an hour and a half and I went, oh, I'm going to go look at the tables. And one of my colleagues physically stopped me and said, please don't. She's like, it's totally a mess. We know it's a mess. We're going to fix it for tomorrow morning. And so it became about like, okay, how do we triage in the moment to make sure folks have accessibility and also recognize that this is not what we're going to do in the next day. Accessibility at the Folklife Festival, Sloan's going to put up a link just so you can take a look at our accessibility page and sort of how we talk about it and the different things we offer. We offer all these services through the festival. And I'll just say accessibility is everyone's job. So we focus a lot, I and my assistant and our team focus a lot on raising awareness and gaining buy-in. So we have an accessibility guide and a general staff overview early on in the process. And that guide gets updated regularly. And then we create orientation modules and tip sheets. And we customize it for the audience. The thing about the Smithsonian Folklife Festival is there's a very small core full year staff. And then the seasonal staff comes on, and then our volunteer, then our participants join us, and then our volunteers join us, and our interns join, so it's getting bigger and bigger each time, but each time it expands, we actually have less time. So when we think about our orientations that we do for all these different groups, our audio teams, our concessions, our participants, we're thinking about what do you need to know right now? Because how is accessibility and inclusion going to impact the way that you are engaging in the festival? I maintain a safe space. It's an open door policy. It's troubleshooting at all times. So folks can always bring up conversations. And we're always striving for business as usual. We never want this to be, something extra. We want it to be the way that we do the work. So that's really how we sort of frame accessibility at the festival. And I'm going to toss it over to Jamie now. And Jamie, you're just going to tell me when to make these slides move.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. So yeah, go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So the first thing with acknowledgement to Arts Midwest for the audit.
How are you?
The audit plan coordinate idea is because to do everything that Diane was just talking about, you as the festival organizer and your team need to know what is available, what are you already doing, and how are you going to then build on that infrastructure that you have. So what I'm going to focus on talking about is specifically some of what Diane alluded to, and that's how is accessibility information being communicated to all of your participants, all of your stakeholders, your audience members, your staff, your volunteers, your artists, your sponsors, and really thinking about it in terms of customer service. Because just like somebody coming to your event for the first time needs a lot of information about where to park and where do I go when I get there and how do I find the performance or the activity that I want to participate in, people with disabilities need a lot of the same information. They just have maybe other reasons or additional reasons why they need specific types of information or accommodation. So how do you, once you have kind of that baseline of, okay, what are we already doing? Then what is your plan? How are you going to tell people about what you're already doing? So if I were to suggest one thing that you could implement this year, it would be figure out that audit, figure out what you're already doing, and then come up with a plan for how to communicate that. How do you communicate what's already there and in place to all the people who you're trying to work with? And that can happen in a lot of different ways. Thinking about your website, thinking about your know before you go emails, thinking about your volunteer training, your staff training, thinking about, like Diane was saying, all the different ways that people process. Are there visuals? How are you handling the visuals? How are you messaging? And also for artists, thinking about how you're advancing, how you're communicating with artists, where they need to go, where they need to load in, if they're carrying a big heavy instrument, and their stage is over on that end of the festival and the parking's on that end of the festival. Do you have a golf cart or something where you can say, hey, if you need help, here's the phone number you call to get the golf cart to come pick you up, or what time, and we'll just schedule it so that somebody knows they will meet you at this spot at this time and take you over to where you need to go. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So when you're thinking about your messaging and communications pieces, one of the ways that I started, because before I was with the Arts Council, I actually helped run a big bluegrass festival in downtown Raleigh. And the communications piece was the piece I felt like I had the most control over at the time. So where I started was thinking about, if I were coming to this event for the first time, or if I were coming to my organization's other events for the first time, what information would I need? Where would I go to look for that information? And so that led to, okay, so we need an accessibility page on our website. Cool. And that's a real simple breakdown of, here's what we're already doing, here's what's already available, and here's how to contact me if you have questions about things that are not already there. And again, just thinking about how are you communicating all of that information to all the different people involved in your event. Go ahead to the next slide. So some of the tools, some of the ways that I've done that before and seen it done, like Diane shared Diane and Sloan shared the accessibility page for the folk festival. Having a dedicated page is a great kind of one-stop shop if people know to look for that page. But if you have multiple events going on or multiple different things, you can also include those details on the different event pages. That's kind of in the sensory guide idea, or in the, this concert has closed captioning and this concert has ASL interpretation and this production has audio description, and having that right where people are already going anyway, so they don't have to go click through another link to find where they're going. Pre-visit guides are a really great tool I have found for sensory friendly, but also, again, just for those first time visitors, in terms of how do I get from the parking deck to the accessible path of travel if I have never been to your space before. Here's the guide, here's the picture, here's what this is going to look like, here's what the crosswalk looks like, here's, the landmark to look for to see where the ramp is to get up into the building. So pre-visit guides definitely, again, that universal access, that inclusion piece. If you start, like Diane said, building it in from the beginning, it gets you a lot further down the road, a lot faster. And then also training guides for staff and volunteers, making sure the accessibility information is in there too, so that they have that information and knowledge, so that when people ask them questions, they can also share it. And they're not coming to you to say, how do we do this? What is this? Where is this? You're empowering them to have the ability to help folks navigate and find their way. But again, it all comes back to starting at that audit point, that figuring out what is already there and in place, so that you know that, so that you can communicate it out by whatever channels. And if anybody has ideas of other channels, certainly want to hear about that afterward, or feel free to share it in the chat too. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. So language matters, right? And so does design. So again, where everything is evolving, things are always changing. There are a couple different ways that people talk about disability. There's person first or disability first. Do your own due diligence for what is happening with the communities that you're working with. And also think about who's already in your audience. I work with a lot of music organizations, and so a lot of them may say, we don't have a lot of deaf or hard of hearing people in our audience right now. Well, that's okay. That's maybe not where you're starting. Maybe your first step is with physical access or with blind or low vision access. But do those people, do people identify as a blind person or a person who is blind? Talk with the people in your community to find out how they want to be addressed, because it's always different and it's always changing. So think about that too as you're putting together your communications and your accessibility pages and your know before you go emails. Also for your website, there are a lot of tools that help make websites more accessible, and it's got nothing to do with website overlays. I'm just going to put the blanket thing out there. At the best, be very skeptical of them, and at most, don't even bother using them. You can spend your money other ways to make your website more accessible, because the overlay will not provide alt text for your photos. It won't caption your videos. A lot of what it will do, the web browsers can already do, making the text bigger and smaller, or changing the contrast, or changing the font. So please tread very, very cautiously when you hear someone say that the overlay is going to make your website accessible, because it won't. But what you can do with your website is to use headings, make sure that your contrast is appropriate. And that's, again, going to help everyone, not just people who are blind or low vision. Alt text on photos also helps with your SEO, your search engine optimization. So there are lots of good reasons to use it. Same with captioning videos. How many times are you out somewhere watching a video on your phone and you might have it on mute, but you can still tell what's going on because there are captions on it? So again, lots of good reasons to use these best practices to make sure that all of your communications channels are as accessible as possible. Next slide. So a few resources here in North Carolina. I know SA will talk about some more as well, and some are the same. But Arts Access North Carolina is an organization that works with arts groups all around the state, helping them find resources and learn about accessibility in the arts. They also do a lot of work in audio description for theaters, but can do for other organizations as well. North Carolina also has assistive technology centers all over the state, and every state has these. And I found out they have all kinds of different devices for blind, low vision, for deaf, hard of hearing. They have adaptive gardening tools, which I just found super fascinating. But if you ever needed, like, we don't have an assistive listening system, cool, maybe go check with your assistive technology center and see if they can lend you one for your event. They do free loans, and they're all over the state, and they can work with each other. So if the one nearest to you doesn't have what you need, they might be able to call somebody else and say, hey, do you have this, and help you find something. And on the web accessibility, the World Wide Web Consortium has guidelines to help you identify what makes a website accessible, and also tips and different links. They're a great resource as well. And again, talk with your community, talk with the people who are already in your audience, who are attending your events. If you know that they have a disability, say, just approach them and be real honest and say, we want to make this as accessible as possible for you and for your community, and we would love your help doing it. And they'll be happy to be asked most of the time, and happy to help point you toward resources and ideas that you may not have thought of before. And on that, I will segue it over to SA.
Thanks, Jamie. And thanks for doing the slide, Diane. Okay, so you've heard about the Smithsonian's amazing Folklife Festival and all the millions of different accessibility things that they do. You've taken a deep dive into communications with Jamie. And so my job is to help you get going at your organization. I came into accessibility backwards because I was hired as a theater's office manager. And once I took the job and showed up at work, they were like, oh yeah, and by the way, you're in charge of accessibility for everyone who comes to our shows. I was like, great, I don't know what you're talking about. So my whole introduction to accessibility was trying to layer it on top of all the other things that I'm doing. And I am assuming that everybody on this call is in the same boat that basically I still am, which means not enough staff, not enough time, not enough money. So hence, I vote for starting from the perspective of one of my all-time favorite quotes by Arthur Ashe, who was an American tennis player and Wimbledon champion, who said, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Slide, please. So what do we mean by start where you are? It means doing what Jamie said, which is figuring out where your strengths already lie. So what are you already good at? How do you already welcome people with disabilities to your events? Maybe your event takes place somewhere that is completely flat. Gold star to you, that helps folks with mobility issues. Maybe you're a dog lover, and so you put out water bowls for any stray dog that might come to your event. Well, gold star for you. That is helpful to folks with service dogs. So look around, or get an intern to look around, or convince an Eagle Scout to make you their group project, and find out what you do well already. Secondly, who's already coming to your programming? One of the ways that Jamie really kicked off her work, hopefully I'm not lying, Jamie will tell me, in accessibility at her Bluegrass Festival, was it turned out there was a couple who came every year and they were blind. And so she really focused on making them comfortable and helping them to have a good time. And if I remember correctly, Jamie, I think those folks eventually made it onto your board of directors. So, or maybe not, but they became a really integral part and advisor to her organization. So who's already coming, who might have a disability, who already loves what you do? Thirdly, maybe there are people in your organization who don't officially work on accessibility who actually know about it. and could provide advice or expertise. Or maybe they're just super interested. Sometimes if somebody has a BFF with a disability, a relative, a mom, a spouse, whomever, they are very interested in seeing accessibility being expanded in the programming that you run. So, have coffee with some folks and ask them what they think. And then thirdly, what are the resources and stuff that you already have at hand or can get easily? Be nice if it's cash and you can raise money at the drop of a hat, but usually that's not the case. So maybe you have great relationships with restaurants or grocery stores so that you can get gluten-free offerings or dairy-free offerings or what have you. Maybe you have great relationships with lumber stores and you can easily build things like ramps or get cable covers for free because they love your programming. What is easy for you to get a hold of, or what do you have in some storage closet that you didn't know what to do with, but might come in handy now? Slide. Okay, so use what you have. So you're going to figure out what you have, and then you're going to put it to good use. So if you have access people already in your neighborhood that you know, who love your programming, you can put them to use. If you've got staff, board members, volunteers, people who walk by on the street who want to help, they can help you form an access team because many hands make light work. And they may have expertise that you don't have, which will make it much easier for you to get a project off the ground. If you have patrons, artists, organizational members who have disabilities, you can ask them, how's it going? Are you having fun at my event? What's one thing I could change to make your experience better? And my bet is they're going to tell you, and then you have a project. There are also people in your neighborhood who are waiting to be invited. And those are people you don't know yet, but would love to lend a hand. And it will be a collaboration. And I know you've had some webinars on that, which means that this relationship has to benefit not only you and your organization, but them as well. And then lastly, you've identified the resources and stuff. So if it's lumber, you know your project's going to be a ramp. If it's food, then you know you're going to focus on food allergies and sensitivities. Whatever it is, you want to keep it easy and simple. Slide. Okay, so I'm going to go a little away from Arthur Ashe because I was talking about people in your neighborhood that would love to be invited, but you don't know. And one of the things that I had to figure out back when I first started working was who can help me for free because I had no money. I just got to bookkeep it. I didn't get to use it. So keep in mind that parks and recreation departments frequently have adaptive recreation programs for folks with disabilities. They have a lot of expertise. My office is actually part of Raleigh's Parks and Recreation program, and I regularly call the specialized recreation folks. I'm like, how do I do this? And they are happy to help. I will also say that a lot of times when Parks and Rec departments have adaptive recreation programs or active adult programs, they are looking for field trips for their participants. And so you may be able to collaborate by they'll help you make your event more accessible for their participants. In return, their participants get to come to your event. Towns and counties, local governments are all required by law to have ADA coordinators. And as a civil servant myself, I am always up for serving my communities. So you can call them for advice and direction. Senior centers function just like a Parks and Recreation department. They know a lot about how to work with folks with a variety of disabilities. and they will be happy to help, particularly if it means they can do field trips with their participants. And maybe the thing that's nice is they get to meet some of your artists one-on-one. Maybe they get to come a little bit early, or they get a special tour. All of that increases their experience while benefiting your organization. Keep in mind that public school special ed departments are chock-a-block with experts. And again, those educators want to see more opportunities out in the community for their students. So they may be very willing to give you a hand, and maybe you come to their career day and talk about how to build a career in event planning or local government or whatever type of organization that you're from. And finally, some of the most fun people to work with are people from other organizations like yours, where you can trade tips and tricks and vent with each other about all the things that go wrong, because they will and they do, and hopefully they'll make funny stories later. But also, if one of your pals has an assistive listening system that you can borrow, then that's great. And then because you know how to build a ramp, you help them with the ramp. And so you have a set of access buddies and a community to help you grow your access and have a good time at the same time. Slide. Thank you. Dan did that really fast because I'm supposed to be quiet really soon. Okay, so finally, do what you can. So also known as focus on low-hanging fruit. Find the things that are really, really easy, because you have a lot of you're very, very busy at your job. So you want to focus on easy wins to start off with. You're not trying to build a whole house by tomorrow. You're trying to put a new brick in, and then another brick, and it may be 2, 3, 5 years, but at the end of that 5 years, then you will have your house. So start with things that are easy. You might start by just talking about what you figured out that you already do well. It's really easy to put that stuff on your website. Maybe you do some social media posts. Maybe you save your social media posts to the next time your event is coming up, and you start popping up stuff like, last year we had great ASL interpretation. Can't wait to see it at the festival again. And that will drive enthusiasm for your event and also get you some well-deserved compliments. Make 5 people happy, not 100, just 5. Find the married couple with disabilities who already comes to your event and make them happy, or make them happier if they're already happy. Find the few people that you can focus on and do a great job with them. Team up. Find buddies either within your organization or talk to people outside of your organization, but find some access friends. Whoops. That's my phone saying I have to be quiet. And finally, make sure to say thank you to people. A lot of times I worked at community theater. We always said, if you feed them, they will come. So if you have access friends, feed them, say thank you, party on, celebrate the great work that you all are doing together. Okay, next slide. Grow. I'm going to go very fast. Celebrate your successes and document them. Like, put them on your website. Don't start a separate Word document that you can't find in 3 months. Silver linings. Things are going wrong, so make a lot of lemonade and learn from what you did wrong. Lemonade always makes people smile. I had a learning community cohort that literally made a scrapbook for folks starting Access, where they focused on a project they did, lemons that went wrong, and the lemonade they made. And so happy to share that link later. Celebrate and create your Access community. A lot of folks in organizations end up feeling very alone and like they're doing it by themselves, and you don't have to. And remember, you're building a house brick by brick. So every year, just add one more thing to your Access toolkit. Slide. Okay, so I'm going to give you some resources. One's the link to our Lemons and Lemonade scrapbook. South Arts does free access webinars, and they also provide some small bits of access funding. The North Carolina Recreation and Parks Association is very big into accessibility, and so you may be able to find resources there. You may also find advice about who to contact in your local area. The next two resources are people whose job it is to help you for free. So make use of their free stuff and make them happy. And finally, one of my favorite resources is the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. They have a huge section on their website about accessible hospitality and events. And with that, back to you, Diane.
Thanks so much, SA. We have some even more resources to just continue that energy that SA talked about in terms of finding your finding your resources and finding your people in doing this work. So the Accessibility Planning Guide for Temporary Events is created by the ADA Network. There's a link to there, and Sloan's dropping it in the chat. Also, I would be remiss, and Jamie did not mention this, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the North Carolina Arts Council has a fantastic arts accessibility page. You should go check it out. Arts Access North Carolina, where Eileen Bagnall is, which Jamie already talked about. I know these two incredible humans that are presenting today with me because of the Access VSA International Network and because of the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference. This is an annual conference that brings together folks from all sorts of cultural arts spaces, museums, theaters, festivals, events, and everything from like Madison Square Garden to, you know, the hippy dippy historical house, right? Like little tiny things. So like, and what is wonderful and what I always say about this conference is it doesn't matter if you've been doing this work for 20 years or 20 days. You walk into that conference and it is a level playing field, and we are all about solving problems and learning new things and exchanging information. So LEAD is a fantastic event. It's happening in Cleveland this coming August, from August 18th through 22nd. The International Network hosts that conference, and the International Network also allows you to, you can become a member for a very nominal fee each year. And like if you go to three of their webinars during the year, you've paid for the membership. But that said, you can also register for the webinars one-on-one. So definitely like get connected with those things as well. We wanted to end by sharing just this quote from one of our colleagues from the LEAD conference, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But I was sitting in a session that John Walder was doing in 2019, and he said, we can't let the fact that we can't do everything be the excuse for not doing anything. And it really resonated with me and several people in the room. So definitely like start where you are. If you wait until you win the lottery to do this work, if you wait until everything is perfect to do this work, you're never going to do this work. It's always going to keep falling to the bottom of the priority list. And should it? No. But does it? Yes. So make sure that you are just jumping in and getting started, and know that you are supported. You have an incredible you have peers around you who are doing this work, but you also have an incredible network of folks nationally who are doing this work and are excited to help you. Please feel free to contact us. This is our contact information. We'll also stick it in the chat during our discussion period. I have 2 emails there because I'm actually not with Folklife for part of the year. So please feel free to reach out to me at either of those. SA and Jamie, I know, are anxious and happy to talk with you folks from North Carolina as well. So we're going to open it up to discussion, and I'm going to turn off the slides in a minute and just open up so that we can all see each other. But let's chat. And to start that chat, I've put in some reflection questions just to get us started in thinking. So like, what's resonating right now? What are you super excited about that you've heard about in the last 45 minutes? What's something you can do right now? Who's your ally? Who are your allies? And it could be the person who's in the cubicle next to you, or it could be someone who's across town. What are your accessibility wins? What have you done at your festival that's been a win? And do you have a goal for your next festival? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing